All right, so should we start this?
Yeah, let's do it. So, this week, I want to talk to you about free jazz.
Okay.
And what that means to you. To give you a little bit of context for me, I mean, we've made a record together in the past.
Right.
I wouldn't call it free jazz, but it's bordering on some loose boundaries. And for me, like, it's been interesting because, you know, I come, like, my educated background is in jazz music, and within that context, I definitely sort of gravitated toward freer music, for lack of a better term. And then, you know, a lot of stuff happened in between, and now I have sort of the thing happening as a singer-songwriter, producer. And the way you approach that kind of music is, in some ways it's similar, in some ways it's incredibly different. And I think as a listener, it's the same thing. Like, and I guess for me, in a lot of ways, like I used to put on free jazz, like, in my car.
Right.
And listen to it and be really encouraged by that and entertained by it and really take a lot out of it. I don't do that.
Okay, so let's start by saying, what do you call free jazz? So you say you put free jazz in your car. What were you putting on that you would call free jazz?
I guess what I would call, some of it was Albert Ayler. Some of it was, probably more of it was like Liberation Music Orchestra.
Right.
That kind of music, sort of 60s like ensembles, like kind of the far out Mingus shit.
Right. I would not call Mingus free jazz.
Yeah. Yeah, me neither, really, probably, if I had to pick a term. Yeah. Let's start there. How has it been in your life? I mean, you know, how have you...
Well, here's the thing, it's like, it's such an open term. I mean, did Ornette have a record called Free Jazz?
Yeah, he did.
So, I mean, somewhere, here's the deal. So we had jazz music, right? Or have jazz music. And it kind of the stuff that came from, you know, New Orleans and Louis Armstrong. And then pretty soon, as it got east and Duke Ellington and Earl Hines, and those guys got hold of it. Became a little more sophisticated as far as the harmony and the arranging and the feeling of the beat. And you know, then the big bands came, people took that stuff, and Fletcher Henderson, and then Fletcher Henderson started, then the white musicians started listening to it, and then you had that combination, and then you had kind of coming out of that, then the Kansas City bands, and coming out of that, Charlie Parker and bebop. I mean, I'm doing a real quick one, right?
Yeah.
You go to bebop, and then Dizzy Gillespie, and then Dizzy started to add Latin rhythms to it, like really African rhythms, but, you know, kind of that come to Cuba. Then that kind of led to the beginning of people using vamps because they come from Cuban music and Afro-Cuban music. Then you kind of had the mixture of blues and vamps, and then you got into like Horace Silver and Art Blakey and that kind of music. And it was less about like it was still kind of grooving, but maybe less really for dancers. And then you got guys like Ornette and Albert Ayler who said, okay, so what can we do? Like, now we're playing this stuff, but we're really going to get away from like Ornette still used a fixed beat, but he didn't use fixed harmony. He used kind of an open harmony, except for his first record, he didn't use a piano. So then you had an idea of like, what's being free? The free part is the relationship of what becomes a melodic root, basically. What is like, what can be, what's your what's your root function? Basically, I think what Ornette did was change what a root function was. So basically, everything could be a melody, a universal melody. Then you had Albert Ayler, who basically brought, you know, this music had gotten very like kind of fast and technical, and he didn't use a strict beat the way Ornette did, who still used like a jazz beat. And he took it and kind of opened the beat wide open. And then kind of Coltrane, this is just my take on this and without thinking about it. Then Coltrane took that, listened to all that stuff and did his version of it, which was taking his band, and he started playing these open vamp songs, these modal songs, which you can kind of, look at it as coming from what, Dizzy had started by using Afro-Cuban vamp music, opening that up, and once he added Pharaoh, he had been so inspired by Albert Ayler, because he was just trying to push into like what the next thing was. He really kind of made free jazz kind of more into the mainstream because it was John Coltrane. But I think one of the things you have to realize is where was American culture at that time. I mean, American culture was exploding, and I think one of the things about free jazz is it kind of bridged the beatnik era and the end of the beatnik era and the beginning of the hippie era. I think you had LSD and kind of mind-altering drugs had a lot to do with that, because people had, just the same way people started to appreciate things like, Jasper Johns and E. Cummings and James Joyce and kind of a non-linear narrative that became part of music as well, like a non-linear narrative.
Do you think that as a listener coming to that kind of music that you need to know, do you need to know the timeline that you just said?
No.
Or can it exist outside of that sort of historical context or outside the cultural context, knowing that like this music is really political and it's really a social commentary in a lot of cases? I did add the political stuff. There was definitely a political side too, right? Because it was around the time of the Panthers and Black liberation. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, can you do people listen to classical music and have to know the fact that Bach was writing for the church and then writing and that other writers were writing commissions for certain wealthy patrons? I don't really know. I do know that I think people are often confused when they hear that music now, because when they hear like the word free jazz or avant-garde, for me, I think it's hard for, here's the reason I can't answer that question, because I was like basically a first generation guy on this stuff. Right. In the sense that or the first generation of being mainstreamed. Like I wasn't there when it was being created and it was the revolution. I was there when you went to a club and that's kind of how people played. So it just seemed normal to me. And it's not like it was, once jazz stopped being popular music in the 40s and became more like, music certain people liked, it was never, wasn't like going to a Grateful Dead concert where there'd be whatever, 5,000 people. There'd be, a club full of people. But it was definitely a club full of people going to hear Cecil Taylor and the Art Ensemble and Pharoah Sanders and those kind of things. When I heard it, it was the music of jazz culture. So I don't really, it's hard for me to hear it it's hard for me to answer that question outside what I know, because I have such a personal relationship with it. Right. Do you go back to that music? Do you feel like you listen to,
Well, I listen to, it's funny, there's a lot of music I don't listen to now. Like I haven't listened to any of my Blue Note records, like with Lee Morgan and Art Blakey. But if I hear them on the radio, I'm like, oh man, those are great. To be honest, I don't listen to a lot of that music that I listened to when I was really young, just because I already listened to it so much, and I've kind of been always trying to find something new. But if I find something new, like, it's very interesting, right? One of the things about not being as busy is I have a chance to listen to all the records I bought for the last 15 years I was too busy to listen to. Because some records I bought and came home and listened to. Some records, especially when I was on the road in Europe, and when you're in Europe, there's often these festivals and there's these old kind of like, in the kind of free jazz thing lasted a whole lot longer in Europe. Yeah. And there's these guys that sell CDs at all the festivals, and they're always the same guys. There's a couple German guys and a couple Italian guys, and whatever festival you're in, there's a guy, and when you go to the Netherlands, he's always there. They kind of travel from festival to festival with their like truck full of CDs. So I remember about 10 years ago, I was in some festival in Germany, and comes a guy, and he's got all these avant-garde CDs. And, I love writing. So I said to him, well, listen, man, what do you have with writing on it? I like stuff with where there's an ensemble. So he says, well, here's something. And 2 days ago, I said, well, it just kind of bubbled to the top of some heap of CDs. And I looked at it, I said, geez, I've never listened to this thing. The guy's name is Ulrich Gumpert. he's a East, and it's an all East German band. It's from what year is it from? I think it's like late 70s. And I put it on, and I've had this thing for at least 10 years in a pile. Album first released by FMP, 1978, July 14th, 1978. Man, it's incredible. It's incredible. It's like Carla Bley. The thing is, Carla has this very Germanic influence, like the Kurt Weill and the Hans Eisler and all that stuff. Except this is like German people doing that, as opposed to Americans inspired by German writers. And it's great. And it's definitely, what you would call, it's organized, but it's definitely what you call free jazz. I mean, it's definitely not swing. I mean, occasionally there's something that kind of, 4/4 walking, kind of free swing, what we used to call free bop. Yeah, I guess one thing I should also say is, like, when I moved to New York, that was the reigning style of music, was free bop.
And when was that?
79. But the lofts were just closing, and the music was in transition. And Defunct, had started to take free music and mix it with funk music, and that was and punk music. So you had this kind of what we called funk punk or punk funk, which was like kind of funk mixed with punk and free jazz, and that was kind of a real new thing that happened. And then kind of Wynton came along, and that really changed everything. But when I came to New York, that was the kind of style of music people, not everyone, but people who were like played, who were like into the sound of now. It was still going on.
And then how did that? So I mean, you were there. You were in New York in the '80s, in the middle of a lot of really exciting improvisers and a lot of free music, like the Zorn stuff and John Lurie and that stuff. Like that isn't not all of that is free jazz, but like, what was that like? Well, it's not free jazz, but it is free jazz in the sense that it's coming. That was like the mother of that music. Like, right. Zorn was really into. I mean, if you hear certain things from Frank Lowe's playing, that really inspired Zorn's playing, and John Lurie's playing was really influenced by Coltrane. But not obviously Coltrane playing bebop, but the way Coltrane played modal music. Yeah, so that was definitely what, if that's what you listen to and that's your inspiration, you're like the next generation from that. And whether it actually has a title or not is, free jazz was almost like the last one that got a title. Right.
But again, like, you have to understand that free jazz really spoke to people at the time. Like, I was there. Like, I saw, I was there at rooms. I remember that there's like when Ken Burns did the jazz series, which I never saw, but again, what I heard was that they would tell this tale about, the art ensemble coming back to Chicago and only playing for white people, and people saying, Cecil Taylor ruined music and ruined jazz. It's like, well, I was there, and and I saw art ensemble play a bunch of times, and if they were playing in a kind of place frequented more by a white audience, it would definitely be more a majority white audience. But I also saw the art ensemble play like in the middle of a black neighborhood, and we were the only white people there. So, history is always colored by people's what they're saying. There's no such thing as true history. Everything is someone's interpretation of history. Yeah. My interpretation, when I saw about seeing that music, is it kind of mattered what neighborhood you were in. I'm sure with Horace Tapscott's music, there weren't a lot of, the audience, it was for black people. That's why he did his thing in Watts. He stayed in Watts. Cecil Taylor didn't ruin jazz. I mean, it was full of young people. I always like to tell people, like, in the late 70s, young people didn't want to, like, young people, my age, because I was younger than most people in jazz clubs, because I was 16 years old, but people in their 20s, kind of young, kind of people who were searching, they weren't necessarily going to want to go see Sarah Vaughan or Kai Winding.
Yeah.
Not that Sarah Vaughan and Kai Winding weren't incredible masters of what they did, but they did want to go see Cecil Taylor because somehow that was speaking to them more. So I don't...
in some ways, do you think there's almost a pop music quality to that? I mean, how it was sort of the zeitgeist of the time, like hit songs are the zeitgeist of the time to some extent?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, absolutely. I'd say yes. But I don't know if it's pop music.
Yeah, I mean that term
but
loosely.
In the sense that the music spoke to people, of its generation. And I always tell people, I remember when I started listening to rock music and went back and listened. My parents had some rock records. I listened to. You ever listen to Big Brother and Holding Company?
A little bit.
Janis Joplin. There's a famous live record with which was a huge record. It had like a R. Crumb cover. And the way that guitar player with Big Brother and Holding Company played, he sounded like Albert Ayler.
Right.
And of course, Coltrane, Santana's whole thing was John Coltrane. There was a real connect between the way it was a time of revolution and people were breaking down boundaries, and that music spoke to mystery and the unknown. And I think because, again, it's just an observation, and I don't know if there's any truth in this, but I think at the time people were really, trying to open the doors of perception. That was a big phrase that people used a lot. And you don't really, as something I've mentioned before, you don't hear that phrase much anymore, opening the doors of perception. But it was a big phrase because people really want to see what else was out in the world. Now you don't open the doors of perception, you go on Facebook, you just open your computer. And because everything's open anyway now in a bizarre way, because you can access all these crazy things, But before that, it was like people were trying to figure out, well, how do you get beyond the known into the unknown? And I think that music really spoke to that searching, because you had to sit there and go through the search.
This might be, I'm not sure. Drugs, marijuana, LSD, all that kind of stuff are very associated with the rock and roll music of that time. Like, it goes hand in hand as part of the culture.
Right.
Was that the case in the free jazz community?
I can't speak for, I wasn't there, but from what I know, of course, because everyone was searching.
Right.
Supposedly that live in one of those live Coltrane records, like Live in Seattle, they're pretty out there. I'm not going to, I can't, you don't want to say these things about people because it's
right, of course.
And there's certain other records I've heard, they were tripping on that record. You hear these stories, and I'm not going to repeat them.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think
I just mean more broadly.
But basically, from the stories I've heard from people, if you were part of the counterculture, that's part of what the counterculture was this, like I said, this. But it was the idea of opening the doors of perception. Like, how do you get beyond the known? That was the whole thing. That's why people can complain about the Grateful Dead all they want, but one of the things they were trying to do was kind of get beyond the known. People were like, well, they didn't even know what the known was. Well, that's also true, but that was kind of the beauty of it. They were just there, these guys that just kind of started playing together when they were young kids and just inventing their own world, and just kept doing it, while other people kind of dropped off. They never stopped doing it. But that was part of what they did. They, instead of just taking a song and saying, okay, we're going to play this, 3.5, 4-minute song the way we did on the record, they'd go like, okay, what happens if we just, what happens if the bass player just, keeps playing some sort of scale that keeps going up higher and higher instead of like holding down the bass line? What happens then? So everyone was kind of trying to push the boundaries to kind of see what else is out there instead of going to Google search. See what else is out there.
This is sort of tangentially related, but it might be too big of a subject to tackle quickly. But how do you feel like Miles fits into that whole?
Well, Miles broke it wide open with Bitches Brew. That was a gold record. Everyone had that record. And that record really, really spoke to people. I mean, it's funny. Again, I guess it was, I don't know if it was a Ken Burns one or some Miles documentary, and Stanley Cox goes, and I don't know if he's really mean this or if he's doing a shtick. He goes, I listen to that record stoned. I listen to that record straight. I listen to it drunk. I can't figure out what it is. The people my generation, I listened to it totally straight the first time I heard it, and I was like, I completely understood it.
Yeah.
Because from my generation, that's how we thought about music. It wasn't a mystery to us because it was reality to us. Like somebody else's mystery becomes your reality. Do you know what I'm saying? Once someone creates the unknown, it becomes the known. And Miles created the unknown with Bitches Brew, but for our generation, it became the known.
Right.
And I understand why someone could get confused by it because I had to transcribe it at one point. And when I transcribed it, because I had to play it, got to play it. This was a great, actually, a Facebook story where someone contacted me on Facebook for a gig playing Bitches Brew in Norway. Like, that was, like, to me, the beginning of the 21st century. I was like, wow, you're really in another world where Italians get in touch with you on Facebook to play Bitches Brew in Norway. And you just show up in Norway because some Italians hired you to play Bitches Brew, rehearse them that afternoon, then play it. So I transcribe Bitches Brew, and I get into, like, I forget which piece it is, but one of the pieces, I'm transcribing Miles' stuff so I can, like, kind of, I'm not going to play exactly, but I want to kind of know what he played. And I get, all those songs are one side long. I start at the beginning, get to the end of the side of the record, and I'm looking at what I wrote, and I said, man, that really looks familiar. And I go back to what I wrote, 2 pages back. I said, wait, that's not like kind of the same phrase. That's the exact same thing I wrote. And I realized, man, they looped this. They just took but Tio took what Miles played at the beginning and put it at the end.
Yeah.
Now, in written music, you might hear that because often you do that. Something's written, what's written at the beginning becomes, you repeat it again at the end. But you don't really hear that usually in improvised music because improvisation has all these subtle differences. But when I looked at that, I realized, wait, there's no subtle difference here. This is landing. This is the exact same notes in the exact same part of the thing, but it sounds like an improvised solo. And so what they did was they manipulated form. They created a sense of narrative that didn't exist before. It's this whole idea of playing with narrative, playing with form, playing with the idea of what's reality. And I think, and Miles really did a great job of that, for the psychedelic generation, because, you're 20 minutes in and you're hearing something and it's giving you a sense, even though it sounds completely free and stream of consciousness, it's creating a narrative for you. Not unlike William Burroughs' Cut Up.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever read any of the Cut Up.
No, no. I was just going to kind of get into Tio's role in that. Like, how much have you talked? What kind of inside info do you have on Tio Macero and his role in that? I just worked with him a couple times, and he was really funny. And, I mean, I didn't get to spend that much time and really get in with him. I wish I would have. He had invited me to his house. He wasn't a particular fan of the slide trumpet. He told me I should have made a lamp out of it. But I think if he heard it now, he would feel different. And he also had a great line when I took it to take the solo. He goes, do you mind if I edit some of these run-on sentences? And I said, yeah, man, you're Tio. Do what you want. But I remember we were doing this record, and I said, yeah, man, my friend Bobby Previtt is, who was like the first guy I knew that, like, now a lot of people do it, but had transcribed Bitches Brew and put together a band to play that music, and he was playing it like at these late night shows in Knitting Factory. I thought, my friend Bobby Previtt is, playing Bitches Brew tonight. I'm going to go down after the session, listen to it. And he goes, playing Bitches Brew live? He goes, why would anyone do that? and he mentioned this funny thing like, I just had to get that record done because, I had a Barbra Streisand date the next morning. But we have to realize it's like, okay, now there's the way we look at music, like it's this great art music, it's our life, and there's a way back when guys were, staff writers, staff producers, you have a product you need to finish because you have another job that starts the next morning. Yeah. So, Tio, I think Tio was really brilliant. I remember talking to Bob Belton, and Bob Belton would say, those horrible edits on Miles live at the Fillmore. I'm like,
what horrible edits on Miles live. Oh, can't you hear that stuff? And it's like, man, when I heard Miles live at the Fillmore for the first time, I was sitting under the redwoods and I was like 17 years old, kind of just completely blissed out. And what did I know, man? It just sounded great to me. Yeah. And those things that to someone who's a trained musician, a little older, and is thinking about things in a really mathematical way might hear as an edit, I just heard as magic. You know, right. And it really inspired me to, like, make quick changes in my music. Like, oh, yeah, let's just change from that section to this section. Because, you know, I heard Miles do it, not knowing it was, like, an allegedly bad edit. Yeah. But, you know, Tio had to make those 40-minute sets into a 24-minute, you know, side of a record. So what are you going to do? Yeah. So I think Tio had a huge effect on people. And, you know, there are people who like to put him down, but people like to put everybody down.
Have you seen that documentary, AKA Cassius Clay? It's a Muhammad Ali documentary.
No, what is that?
You have Netflix?
Yeah, I got Netflix. Yeah, I got Netflix.
I don't know, man. I don't know where you're at.
I'm at Netflix, okay? I'm not much farther, but I'm definitely at Netflix.
So there's this documentary called AKA Cassius Clay on there. Tio Macero. I watched it because I like that kind of shit, and it's got this incredible soundtrack behind it, and it's sort of like just kind of just really straight down the middle, kind of like electric jazz from the late '60s, kind of really grooving, cool arrangements, just really kind of weird too, like. And I was like, man, what is this music? I've never heard it. Tio Macero did the soundtrack for it.
It's an original soundtrack he did.
It's an original soundtrack that he did that's unreleased. It is currently unreleased. Spacebomb has sort of like tried to track it down a little bit, like called some people and just poked our head in those doors a little bit. And it's basically like, I don't know who.
You know, it could have been. I wonder if Scotty Hart has anything to do with it, because Scotty used to work with Tio a lot at the end.
It was made in the 60s. It was made when Muhammad Ali was on hiatus because he had refused to go to Vietnam. And
the documentary was made back then.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because basically he was banned from boxing for like 3 years.
I remember.
And so he wasn't doing anything. And so they made this documentary about him. And it's kind of in this weird in-between time because he hadn't done the Frazier fights, he hadn't done the George Foreman fights. He was like the Sonny Liston guy, and like, you know, and so it's made. That's what I mean. It's made during that time, like right in the middle of that time. And
I can't believe it's not something that people talk about. Wow.
Yeah, and it's not released. It's like it's unavailable. No one's ever released it, and I tried to track it down, and it's basically, I think his publisher or whoever his representative was like, I mean, it's either at his house in a box somewhere,
there's a basement full of tapes,
or it's in the Columbia archives, like in a box, and it's just like you're welcome to kind of look for it if you want to,
right?
But someone's just going to have to go find it and see what it is.
Wow.
Anyway.
Well, there's two. Well, you could talk to Scotty Hart because he did help Tio go through stuff at the end of his life.
Okay.
And of course, the other person to talk to would be Michael Kuskuna. You know, kind of searches through. No, he wasn't really a Columbia guy. He is a guy who kind of searches. Or the other person you call, but then he'll end up putting out is Zev Feldman. You know, the guy who puts out all that stuff.
Yeah.
Have you met him yet?
No.
He's amazing, man. And he's about your age. Between your age and my age.
Oh, I'd love to meet him.
Yeah. You know what that guy's been doing? He's just been going around the world finding things. And someone, I can't quite figure out, obviously some really rich person is paying for him to do this because he puts out these beautiful packages of the stuff that's just for, you know, I mean, it's interesting. He sent them to me because he's a fan, but...
What label is it?
It's called... What is that label? That puts that stuff out? I mean, it's a specialty label. He found this Jimmy Jufrey trio with drums. Like the only time he ever played with drums, it was like a live concert from like a Museum of Modern Art. He found this Larry Young stuff with Woody Shaw.
Oh, it's like jazz. It's jazz music.
Yeah, jazz. Yeah, he loves Wes Montgomery. He found all this Wes Montgomery stuff. Resonance Records.
Resonance. Okay, nice.
Yeah, it's incredible. Someone sent him around the world to find things.
That's killer. Good gig if you can get it.
Yeah, so he just goes and he'll go into these radio archives and all over the world and find things. And then what they do is that they do beautiful packaging, incredible, everything's with, multiple page,
right.
multi-page liner notes and archival photos and da-da-da. Yeah, he found this Charles Lloyd stuff, live Charles Lloyd that no one had heard. Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
That's killer. What are a couple records that are entrances to that world where you hear?
Here's best entrance point for me, Don Cherry, Complete Communion. Because it's super rhythmic, super melodic, and super free. And then, so if you listen to that and listen to, and then I would say Archie Shepp, Mama Too Tight, and then in a sense it's free jazz. In a sense, it's the beginning of free jazz almost, or one of the early beginnings of free jazz would be, A Love Supreme.
Right.
And then, an early Ornette record, I would say, This Is Our Music. If you get Ornette, right. This Is Our Music, Don Cherry, Complete Communion, John Coltrane, A Love Supreme, and Archie Shepp, Mama Too Tight.
That's fantastic.
There you
fantastic. Go. That's a fantastic day of listening.
Oh, and know what else? One more. Cecil Taylor, solo piano live at Montreux. All right? There you go.
Thanks so much, Stephen.
All right, baby. Get back to the studio, man. Bye.
Yes.
A Spacebomb production.